All right. I think we're live. Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for showing up today and joining us for this episode. Today's guest is Joshua Butts, who's currently a principal designer at U.com, which is an AI-powered search engine that's giving Google a run for its money. Previously, he worked at Meta on their community messenger audio channels. He's also a proud father of two sets of twins. So that's four kids, because the first time he said it, I thought he only had two kids for a little bit until my mind caught up. What I'm most impressed by is the fact that he dives like face first into new technology. He's always trying out new things when it comes to VR, 3D printing, and now AI stuff. So uh, all the stuff that he's been showing in terms of demos have been super impressive. So I really wanted to get him in here today and showcase some of the stuff he's been working on, and also just kind of talk us through his process. Joshua, how are you doing today?
Yeah, thanks, Hang, for having me on. I'm excited to be talking about AI products and some of my processes for things.
Awesome. Yeah, let's just dive into it. You know what? Let's I want to ask a few questions first because you have four kids, two sets of twins, and you have a full-time job, and you also manage to dive into new technologies. How do you do that? Because I have zero kids and I'm not working full time, and I barely find time to try out new stuff. How do you do it?
It's kind of funny. I think there's a couple of aspects of it. I think the one driving side of me is like I'm very obsessed with learning, and I felt like I like in high school and everything. I never felt like I got what I wanted out of it, especially college. And once I graduated college, I'm like, great, now I can start learning. And everything that I could get my hands on, that I could learn something and find a way of making myself better, but also like seeing what I could do. Like knowledge is power, and the more knowledge I had, like I started out after college getting pretty heavy into photography and video type work, and I would see like these really cool videos and things online, and I always wanted to be able to do like when I'd see professionals, like I how do they do that? Like I want to get that good. And so I would like study their work and see like what things worked and what didn't, and I would try things out and just try to learn. And then once I felt like I was getting close to that, then I'd say, okay, what's something else I can learn that I like doing? I like making things because that just like there's something in me, like I'm kind of an artist at heart too, and I like making and creating things. And so that always kind of led to the next step. Like I've gotten to a little bit of music production, and growing up I did a little bit of music, and I always wanted to like learn how music worked, and so I got really into that. And then even more recently, I like some of the videos on YouTube of like Mark Rober and mechanical engineering type things. And so I've recently gotten more into like IoT and coding things. And, I recently even built a smart temperature sensor for some of the freezers I have, so I can make sure, my food doesn't go bad in case my kids leave the freezer door open or something like that. So it's really all about learning. And, when I have my full-time job, I'll be, doing things during the day, but there's always some way to think outside of the box and learn something for a project I have. And usually at jobs I've had, I'm always seen as the person who's like, how come you always get the cool projects? But it's
Yeah.
usually because I always try to find a way to make what I'm doing interesting, because then it's more fun for me. The client or whoever I'm doing the project for enjoys it more and likes it. And then I usually get to learn something in the process as well.
That's so cool. What did you major in college?
So I just majored in graphic design, and I did do a minor in computer science.
Cool. That seems to fit in pretty well. But you went into photography as well. And I love that you're into Mark Rober because his stuff is super cool. Have you been thinking of making prank stuff like his like glitter bomb?
Yeah, I always think that his prank type stuff is fun. I've always tried to be more, and there's nothing against like prank things or novelty type things. I've always tried to think like how can I like make something useful, and that's where like when I came up with this idea for a smart temperature sensor, like there's a pain point in my life. And I'm very into like smart devices. Like I love hardware and smart devices. So I've thought of like how can I make my life better. I've decked out my whole house with smart lights, and so I can now just tell my Google Assistant or something like, hey, just turn off all the lights, I'm going to bed, and I don't have to worry about them being left on. Or like my garage, sometimes the kids will leave it open after they've been playing at night, and it used to get left open overnight, and it always stressed me out. And so getting a smart garage door opener meant that the garage would just close like at 9 o'clock every night. And some of the devices I wanted to build are like a uh, voltage monitor for my car because sometimes my car battery fluctuates and it goes bad, and I want to be able to check if it's using battery while my car is parked or something like that. Or like window openers, like how cool it'd be if it's a hot summer day and then I can say, hey, assistant, close all the windows because it's too hot, and I'll just turn on the AC. And then if it did that, like automation and things like that are just, I really love those ideas of just making life easier and having utility for stuff like that.
I love that. I feel like you're solving all your own personal problems by using or by hacking all these different tools together. Is there a primary learning channel that you use? Is it YouTube videos or do you read stuff? Is there a single source or multiple sources that you draw from?
Yeah, I think I go on to, I think YouTube is definitely a big one. I've looked at a lot of different articles. I'd say the single biggest source of it, of what I can learn, is experimenting and playing around with things. Now, it always starts with you don't know what you don't know. And so AI has actually helped a lot with that, like learning if there's something I don't know about certain technology, I can ask. And AI doesn't know everything, but can usually, sometimes get me started on the right path of knowing what to research. And then looking at people who inspire me. Like for music, for example, like Charlie Puth, and there's some really great artists out there. And in fact, I'm a big fan of the Chainsmokers as well. And so I saw some videos that a couple of these big news agencies did of them, and I watched those, and they went in the background of some of their process. But when you're watching certain videos of people that have really made it, there's always little nuggets of things that you can find. Like sometimes I'll see screen recordings, and then I'll see like a logo of the software they're using. I'm like, okay, well, if there's a professional using that software, there must be something there. And so I'll look into the software or the process they're using, and I'll see like, what is the purpose of that? And that's usually like kind of part of my process too for learning, is understanding the why. If I can't know the why, then I can't ever use it for something useful, which is like whenever I'm building, coding IoT or even building products for AI. If I can know why something works the way it works, then I can know how I can use it to do what I want to do with it.
That's really cool. I think we should dive into the demos at this point because I know you've queued them up and they look really cool based on the preview that I got.
Yeah, sure. In fact, this one, so I'll bring up this one that I've been working on pretty recently that I'm really excited about. Um, so I've been experimenting a lot with things like prompt chaining, and what I found when I've worked with people that are using AI a lot, I find that people use, so there's a prompt. The way AI works, you'll ask it a question, but oftentimes you'll have to give it a little bit of context. Like let's say you want to write everything in a bullet list. Well, if you wanted to do that a lot, then you'd have to tell it every single time you ask the AI, hey, what I'm about to ask you, write it in a bullet list. And if you're doing that a lot, that would start to get really cumbersome. And so one of the ideas I've been playing with is kind of this idea of adding presets. So this is kind of this, more of a ChatGPT type interface. And you could create like a preset. So let's say I was going to do like a, let's say Spanish. I mean, some people don't even, so let's say, I'll call this Spanish, and then like always write everything in Spanish, and I'll make sure the type is like an AI chat. If I save that, then I can use that as a preset. And this is just a prototype, but the idea behind this prototype is to test out the technology, which is a really amazing thing about prototyping software, is it has given a lot of functionality into to the hands of designers. It's not exclusive to just engineers. And you can test things out. So let's say I was going to say, give me some dinner recipes for my family of 6, but I don't have to say write it in Spanish or give me in bullets, because I can add that as this kind of preset. And if I send that, and in fact, I can even show you some stuff right here. This is what's going on in the background. It sent this thing right here, this message, and it using those instructions right there every single time. And I didn't have to say write in Spanish because that's in that template that I'm using. And it's giving me that recipe in Spanish. And so you could use that for all kinds of different things. So I've actually got one preset that I created, which uses an image generator. And the way I'm prototyping this is it selects a different variable and it gives it different instructions based on that. So let's say I wanted to, do something funny, like, add 1 or more dogs into the image always. And then this is going to be like the dogs. and then I can say like a beautiful beach with a sunset or something like that. So what's going to happen though, I didn't say anything about dogs right here, but since that template is injecting dogs into the prompt every time, it's going to give me an image that should have a dog in it. So here we go, a beautiful beach with a sunset. Didn't say anything about dogs, but there's dogs in it. So every single time I ask it to create an image, it's going to throw dogs in there because I'm using this preset. And so then what I can do is like test this out with users if I want to, and see like if this is the kind of thing that they would be using a lot. And based on a lot of research that I've seen and feedback from users on different kind of platforms, this has been a pretty strong use case.
This is so cool. I love
And
this.
so there's another one if you want. There's some similarities with this idea as well. Got to refresh that. So this one is an intent classifier. And so what I've done is used, so you can see this is kind of what's going on in the back end. With APIs, and that's kind of how the AI does a lot of this stuff. It's AI is really the biggest advantage for where AI can start filling in gaps in the world is using APIs that you can start doing things like at the core. There's kind of two main uses for AI, like where it's translating natural language into something useful, but it can start connecting those dots using APIs for products, and then you could essentially do anything you could imagine. And so in this situation right here, I'm using this system prompt that's going to inject every single time I ask a question, and this one is classifying the intent that somebody has. So it's like I have a list of possible intents. One is information gathering. And so that means like the user will often interact with chatbots to gain information. The second one's like purchasing products. So it's got all these different possible things that I may want to do based on the question I'm asking. And then at the end, I've got respond in all lowercase format with this text. And so it's going to do something with that text because I'm using prompt chaining, which basically means that I'll send a prompt, it will give me an answer back, and then it will send another prompt that will be using that previous answer. And so I'll say, here's the question that the user is asking, and I've got this text replace me, which I'll kind of show how that works in the prototyping software in a second. But then it's got some other information template that's being used by the AI API for OpenAI. So for example, if I say, why is the sky blue? I send that, then, I'm sorry, right here, I can see it asks that question right here. It says get intent. That's the message it's sending. And so there's that big system message that I showed a second ago. And then right here, it shows that that's information gathering. And so based on that, it sends another request. And it's why is the sky blue? Because it's just a basic information intent. But if it's a different one, like if I say create an image of a dog at the beach, then it says image only, because it knows I only want to create an image. And so instead of giving me text, it's just going to create an image, which you can see right here, intent found, ask, it's an image. And so now it's sending this ask image, and it created an image of a dog at the beach instead of any kind of text. Now I created another one where it's like create an image and a story of a dog on a farm or something like that. And so now it knows that it's got this intent image story. So now it's going to actually send a different set of responses. And this is using a different API that works a little bit differently. It requires you to send a request, and it creates that, but then you have to send another request to get it back. It won't just send it back automatically the way OpenAI does. And so I have it looping back and forth, checking if it's been created. And here you go. You've got an image of a dog on a farm, and then here's your little story right there.
That's really cool. How is this different from using ChatGPT by itself without the intents?
Yeah, so the way ChatGPT works, you've actually got most of the actual ChatGPT. It's using like GPT creators, which you can go through, and there's a pretty big, complicated process for doing that. And it's usually only going to give you like one intent at a time, or it's not going to break down those intents. You're still going to have to do a lot of this work on the side. And so this right here, this prototyping is more taking that kind of technology and experimenting with different things you could do with it and trying to make it more useful. And it's become a big trend, especially in 2024, where with multimodal design, and ChatGPT, while it has some degree of that, and even other products, Perplexity and even U.com, like there's some degree of multimodal that they've been adding in, but generally it's fairly limited. And that is like one of the biggest use cases for AI, is like the more types of content you can actually show in a more useful way than just text, that's going to solve problems faster and give, like, users tend to like things somewhat visual or formatted based on the needs of what they're looking for. And that's where experimenting with using prompt chaining or finding out what you can do with that is really gonna get users what they need faster, and just be more interesting as well.
Got it. So in many ways, you're prototyping different types of interactions that weren't possible before, and this allows you to test things out before you implement something.
Yeah, and I think a big opportunity for this is with starting to create out like different types of widgets. In fact, so this isn't going to show anything, but if I said like create an explicit story, I've created an actual module. They'll say like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't provide any of that. So this is where like it starts to become more multimodal, where if you had like hundreds or thousands of these different types of modules, and I think that's kind of where AI is eventually going to go once the technology gets there, is people won't be designing modules. The AI will be designing custom UI on the fly that is best for your needs, rather than just doing everything in text or everything with like pre-designed modules. You'll be able to do ask it like, hey, tell me about my subscriptions, and it'll create like graphs and show all the charts and everything that you need right there very quickly for you.
That's very cool. I never really imagined it that way.
Yeah, I think there's a
Awesome.
lot of opportunities with AI for solving problems, and like I mentioned earlier, like automating to solutions very quickly.
Would you prefer we look through more demos or talk a
Yeah,
bit
so
about
this is
how this is built?
another project. When I worked on this project for Astronaut, it brought in a lot more of that multimodal type of an idea, where a lot of companies are approaching AI with a fairly limited mindset, and I think that OpenAI has kind of created that, where it's just this chat interface, and you're starting to see more and more companies that are building more back-end machine learning type products and features, but there's still a lot of people that are limiting their mindset on like, okay, how do I just use like chat? How do I add like an AI chat in my product? And so this company Astronaut had some of that, where that's kind of their first approach, was adding that. But when I worked on this project, I was working on how we could use AI in the background and give users more types of modules. And so what Astronaut is they take community platforms like Discord or like Slack, and they will aggregate all the data in that regularly into like a vector database, which is a type of database that can more easily be read by AI platforms. And then it can quickly parse through that information and make it more usable. In fact, when I created this kind of reports work, the first approach that I took was actually going through and finding out what people wanted. Because AI can be used for useful things, and it can be used for a lot of things that aren't that useful. And so I went through and looked at the type of data that people wanted that might be useful to understand about your community. And I split into what things could be useful from the AI standpoint, like what do you need an AI to parse through natural language, but what is just like static data that you might want. And I kind of tagged each one of these types of things with what, a prompt, which means the AI, like top 5 pain points that community members are having. Well, you would need a prompt to have an AI go through and actually figure that out. Whereas, what post had most reactions, well, that's just a number. So you don't need an AI to look through that. And then I mapped those all out to different modules. So then I was able to create a prototype. And so, for example, you would go to this reports page, and you could see a summary, and then you click on, maybe it's like, tell me about the engagement for my community. And then every time you landed here, this summary would be about the engagement. Or you could see like, hey, I want an overview of the most popular topics. Now, if you were the community manager for that community and you could get this really quick overview, that would probably directly impact like the type of things that you're having, other moderators bring up in conversations with those community members, and you could directly translate that to impact on the business, and ideally be, making your business more money. And that's why, like right here, AI uses a lot of tokens too, and that was another reason that in this project that I had to be really conscious of what type of data I was pulling from static data versus prompted data. And in each of these sections, you have to load it manually because AI takes a minute to load data. And so if it was like, if you had to apply, if you hit one of these and it reset the entire page, that could actually take a bit of time to load everything. But doing it this way, it allows you to, go through one at a time, and then you can either apply all the filters or just apply one at a time. And then that makes the process a lot more efficient for users.
This might be a dumb question, but how would this be different compared to another tool that's basically a data ingester that would then show the information on a dashboard versus using AI to produce this information?
Yeah, so some of this information would be really difficult for, just some database to pull out, and AI can actually go through and get very qualitative data. And I think that is one of the huge advantages to AI. Now, it's not perfect, like it may not get everything, but it can usually get a pretty solid idea of what type of qualitative, it basically quantifies qualitative data. In fact, this section down here, this is just kind of a template, but if you were to want to look at the top discussions that maybe your community members in this community were talking about, you could look at that and see the top things and how many people were talking about it. There's no way you could know that with any other type of a tool, because there could be like 10 different questions asked in 10 different ways. And some of those might be essentially the same question, but there's no way you could know without an AI going through natural language and processing that and merging those into like one overall idea.
I get it. So it's going beyond the simple metrics like engagement or posts per day or messages, etc. And it's more talking about sentiment or complex higher level topics.
Yeah. And that's cool. Basically, what I had mentioned before, the main advantage to AI is it's turning qualitative data into quantitative data.
It's very cool. Should we talk a bit about how you're building these things?
Yeah. So, and we can even go back to, some of these other ones. So this is the software I'm using that I usually use. It's ProtoPie. It's a little bit more user friendly, but there's other types of prototyping software and ways you could approach something like this. First off, like most people think that you can just build this stuff, like no coding experience and everything. And that's the way a lot of these companies sell it. You look at Webflow, which is like a web builder. And while yes, you can build all that stuff without knowing code, but they don't really tell you that like if it's a lot easier if you understand how code works, because most of these platforms are still to some degree. I mean, first of all, they are actually coded, but second of all, they're built with a lot of engineering principles in the front end. And so if you know how those work, for example, ProtoPie right here. So they have this variable system, and that's how a lot of coding works. Like you have variables set up and different types of variables that you're using at different times. So in this example, this AI preset builder, I've got a few, sorry. Okay. I've got a few different variable types. Like one is like this AI query, which is, it's got my system message, which I've got, some of the stuff set up here, that intent classifier one I had here. These are some other system messages that I've got from the API documentation from that company. And that's where, especially working with AI, learning how to read an API is very important, because if you can read an API documentation, then you can do pretty much anything with it. So, there's a couple ways of approaching this. You could either, prototype in one of these types of software. If you know how to code, then, more power to you, because you could actually just prototype something with live code, which would be a little bit more powerful, but, it might potentially take a little longer. So I've got some of these different variables set up. And then if a user if I've got actions set up. So if you're clicking on say this input field, then when you submit a response, so anytime I've got this like checking for you hitting return on the keyboard, or if you click on the submit button, then it sends this message to like the send query message, and then it has this other message intake where it does all these actions. It's like turning on the opacity of certain things, it's replacing the text, and then it's resetting these templates, which I've got, just to make sure that it's always going to have that template ready to replace the text. And then it's taking the text that the user has sent. So it's using this kind of thing like a replace, and then it's replacing the template. That's the template. And then this is the text in the template. This is the replace question. That's the repq stands for. And then this is the initial query, which means whatever the user had typed in there. And then once it sends that, and it's also checking, like it's got these kind of if-then statements, which is a big principle in coding. And so if it's an image generation, it's going to send this message, ask image, to ProtoPie Connect. But if it's a chat, if it's AI chat, then it's going to just send a query, and then you're going to get text back. And once you do that, then it's going to send that message to ProtoPie, and you can see the ProtoPie Connect, and then it's going to give you all these different responses. And once it gets those back, see it's got this one, get response, then it's going to play this animation, which I've got this Lottie animation right there I've set up. It's going to replace the text, and it's going to send that to whatever the API gets, is going to send it to a variable, and then it's going to go through, that variable is going to be in JSON. It's going to send that information to the variable and then pull just the information, that content out using this kind of code, and then it's going to give me the response right there. And then, based on different things, so like this intent classifier, for example, I'm doing a lot of those same things, but since I'm checking for the intent first, I'm doing a little bit of prompt chaining. Then instead of it just adding that text, it's actually going to figure out what the intent was. So this is like receive the intent. If it's information gathering, it'll use this template. If it's image and text, then it's going to send 2 messages to get the image and the text. If it's a website, it'll just do like a very basic, website domain censored. So that's where you can start creating a lot of different template types.
This is very cool. So just curious, and this is a dumb question as well, but how much coding do you know?
I like to think I'm pretty solidly versed in HTML, CSS. I'd say I'm like, mid-range in JavaScript. I know it pretty well, but not enough to really build a full web application. And then more recently, I've gotten a lot more into C++ coding for, hardware and IoT type work. And so, if I was going to try to get a job, I could maybe get a junior like front-end development job. But I've been pushing a lot more, trying to learn as much as I can about coding as well.
I see. How much coding do you need to know to build something like this? Like if you were to start from zero again, how much work would you need to put in terms of learning how to code to build some of the prototypes that you showed?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is you don't. So it depends on what you want to do. If you want to do just some like image generation, like API thing with here, you're going to need to know a little bit more. I mean, ultimately, like the way these companies are selling is you don't need to know how to code. And the reality is you don't, but you would have to follow, say, like a YouTube tutorial pretty closely. And I actually I've created some of my own YouTube tutorials on this exact process. Some of these prototypes I've got right here, I show like a full breakdown of how I make them on those YouTube tutorials. So if you follow those, you can actually, build this without too much complexity. But if you really want to know like how things are working and be able to control that more, the more you know about the way variables work and code works, I would start. I mean, everyone's got a different opinion. I personally really like JavaScript because it's a fairly user-friendly language that applies. I mean, I started in JavaScript and then I've moved to C++, and I found a lot of similarities in how they work, and it's helped me. I mean, you could start in C++ or other languages. Python's very popular as well. But as long as you know some of the principles of how code works, you can do a lot of these types of things. In fact, even Origami. So this is what Origami works, and that's some prototyping software that Meta has created. and they've got a lot of those same types of features. And I think that this one, you'd probably want to know a little bit more about code. But mostly like how functions work, how variables work, and like if then statements and loops, and a couple of those principles. If you just know how those work, you don't necessarily have to know how to like be able to code in them, but as long as you know how they work, it's going to help you a lot with understanding the principles of some of this prototyping software. In this origami, you still got like a network request, which is very similar to ProtoPie Connect, and then you can still get objects, and this is a response, but then this is like the system message that I've got right there as well.
This is very cool. So several months ago, when I had Yadi Arroyo on the show, she talked about the different types of or different archetypes when it comes to designers when they're working on AI. And she had archetypes like the coder or somebody who is more of an information architect. And it seems like you slot very well into the interaction design part of designers who are working on AI. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, I definitely consider myself an interaction designer, and I consider interaction design more the merging of like information architecture and more the actual like a mix of that and kind of prototyping and just understanding like if user clicks this, what type of interaction are they going to experience, and those types of things are they leverage prototyping really well because some of those interactions are really difficult to show in just static designs. Especially when like some degree of motion, or if you click on a like gestures for like mobile devices, gestures that really can't be done without prototyping because it's all very motion based.
Got it. We're a little over the halfway point at this point. Would you prefer that we look through more of the demos and talk about how you built them, or we could talk more about the theories about, I guess, interaction design when it comes to AI products?
Yeah, we could talk about the interaction design side of things.
Okay, cool. Would you mind just going back to
Oh
the
yeah.
yeah. So what I've seen so far is you built out a ton of really interesting and cool features on the interaction side so that people can leverage AI more effectively. Where do you feel like this is all going? Because as you build additional abstraction layers, it feels like we're getting to this goal someday when it comes to users leveraging AI. Where do you see that going down the line?
Yeah, I think that you're going to start noticing certain steps that AI is taking. I think the phase we're in right now is starting to get into that multimodal type phase where APIs and different types of visual widgets are going to start coming up a lot more in AIs that people are working with. And that's why you see like the product Rabbit AI, where it's saying like, hey, can you order a pizza? Now, I think that there's still a little bit of a gap in that technology and some of those claims there, but I think that it won't be very long before some of that stuff is reality, where APIs and AI are connecting. In fact, even with this that project I had worked on for Astronaut, that's essentially what they're doing. They're just connecting to APIs for these integrations and then using the AI to parse through that information and do something with it. And I think authentication is a big part of that. Like if authentication, there's privacy things with AI and connecting to platforms, but once those problems get more resolved and we have more control over that, APIs are going to be connected a lot more with AI, and then asking it to order like a pizza or something like that is going to be a lot easier, especially when an AI can learn an API without any like manual coding, without having to manually like create that integration with that API. I think another big part of that is, some of you may have heard of like Google's done tests with scheduling appointments for me, where it actually has a voice. You can say, hey, call the the barber and schedule an appointment, or it has like hold for me things where there's an actual voice that's talking to a human. Now there's still a lot of progress that could be made in that area, but where certain say like a pizza shop down the road, they may not even have a website or an API at all. So how could an AI order something from them? That's just not going to work very well. But if you once like AI can start more reliably like doing things on its own, like it could call the pizza shop down the road for you, then that's where you're really going to notice a huge change in the atmosphere with AI and things like that. And and there's going to be a lot more progress in that direction.
So I want to wrap something that you said a little bit earlier, which is how AI connects to API. So right now, when you're working on these demos, you're manually connecting the APIs, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you're suggesting that in the future, AI would be able to look at API documentations and then just connect to them on the
Yeah, I mean,
fly.
the reality is most API documentation is public facing, and so
Yeah.
authentication is really where one of the biggest blockers are. But if an AI could go to a website, read all the API documentation, and learn how the API worked, it could just start writing all its own code. And as long as you have that manual control over authentication, then that is kind of the gate right there. But then once you open that gate, then you could start building like integrations really quickly. And I think there's another thing about AI is global memory, where right now, if you just have AIs, they're doing things, they don't remember what's going on. And so you'd have to either be authenticating a lot, or there's a limit. And that's where, privacy comes into. If you have localized AI memory where you could start training your own AI, then you can be less worried about, privacy concerns, because you have all that data, on your local machine or something like that, or on your own local cloud. And then you could trust the AI to use your information a little bit more. Well, you have a little more control over that, and then the AI could connect to like all of your platforms if you wanted to, and then do pretty much anything at that point.
When you say authentication, is that the API authenticating the AI agent or the AI authenticating the user?
I think oftentimes, I think there's two aspects of it. Yeah, like, so most APIs often require like an API key. So the AI would need a way of getting that key to access the API. And some APIs, a lot of APIs you have to pay for too. So that'd have to be somehow built into the system. But then there's also the user authentication where the API needs, so yeah, there's the two parts of authentication. The API needs access, the AI needs access to the API itself, and then it also needs access to that user's account on that platform.
Have you tried to build a demo of something like that?
I haven't yet. I have experimented a little bit. I did one with Notion once where I was like, well, if I can use these APIs with these, kind of public type APIs like, like OpenAI, and just do more generalistic things. Like, I've got a Notion account. Like, can I connect the API to that? And I've actually messed with that a little bit, and you can. And you could, like, if you could do that, like, then it just opens up a crazy whole world of possibilities.
So, speaking of that, if you had unlimited time and budget and you can build whatever you want using AI, what would you try to build next?
A lot of it would come back to like a lot of my home automation type things. I would try to build,
Yeah.
connect different types of smart devices that I've got in my house with it. And I know at the stage that AI is at right now, I know a lot of people can freak out about giving AI that much access. And I know there's a lot of concerns about, like, you've got movies like iRobot and stuff where AI has taken over the world. And I know that, I think Elon Musk and there's a few other people brought up concerns about AI safety. And I think there's definitely a lot of aspects of that are, that, could be concerns. But the stage I'm at now, however, people may want to criticize it. Like, I like experimenting with technology, and I would want to just see what I could do with it in as safe of an environment as I could build. And I think my smart home devices would be a really fun one to try out.
What's your biggest concern right now when it comes to AI from your standpoint?
I think that some people, worry that AI is going to just make its own decisions and go rogue. I am more concerned about just general reliability. I think there are some aspects of AI that have the same problems as, like, your regular Alexa or Google assistants, where you're going to ask it something and it'll mishear what you said, or it won't understand it correctly, and it's just going to it's not going to go do whatever it wants. It's going to do what you said or what it thinks you said. And I think that really, and I think that's core of like all products, is reliability. That's like one of the single most important things about a product for any person is this product reliable? If I click something, if I do something, is what I expect it to happen going to happen? And I think that is one of the biggest problems. Like AI hallucinates a lot right now, and there are some of those issues with AI that I think that's where some of the concerns are and the risks are with AI right now. And I think that those will start improving over time as well.
Got it. So, given the current limitations of AI and how companies are leveraging AI, how do you see companies using it effectively in the future? Because it feels like a lot of companies right now, when they talk about using AI, they tend to do it in a very haphazard way. And I keep using LinkedIn as an example, but it often feels like when LinkedIn incorporates a new AI feature, it's not something that people want to use or find useful at all. It's more of an eyesore that they've just thrown in there, and it's accosting you in a way each time you open up LinkedIn. How do you see companies leveraging it so that it's not as ineffective?
Yeah, so I think I've thought about that a lot, and I think that one of the biggest downsides to that is I think companies are going to have their own like in-house, whether it's models or their licensing models. They're going to have all that data housed um, themselves instead of using other companies' AIs. Like right now, you've got like Anthropic, they've got Claude, or you've got OpenAI, um, and there's a few other models like Llama. And so a lot of companies are just using those other APIs to bring in the AI into their own platform, but there's a lot of limitations around doing that. And so once you could bring in the AI in-house and be training it yourself, then you could give it a lot more access to all your entire platform and do more types of things with it. And like you're saying, like a lot of companies are just throwing in an AI chat, so you can just ask it random questions that oftentimes may not have that much context about your own product. And that's where I think AI is going to really be filling in a gap where, AI is not just the product itself. And I think a lot of people are thinking of it that way. Like, oh, somebody's going to come to my product and I need to build an AI for them to use. But that's not how it works. So you don't go to the movie theater to buy soda. You go to the movie theater to watch a movie. And
Right.
that's where like a lot of these products, people are going to the product to use the product. They're not going there to use AI. But AI is going to become a staple of every product. Just like if you go to the movie theater, you want soda or you want popcorn. Now, some people may actually go to the movie theater just to buy popcorn, but like soda or those other things, that is kind of a table stakes to make your experience good, but that's not the point of the experience. The point of the experience is to go see the movie. And the point of the product is to use that product to solve your pain points. And AI is going to be kind of a table stakes. And I think customer support and the human interaction side of companies, that's one of the biggest areas that AI is going to start, replacing or benefiting users. Is like if I go to Walmart, if I check out, now they do have self-checkout, but there's oftentimes a human involved in that. And wherever that human isn't needed, or where I can get access to what I need, solving my problem as fast as possible, if an AI can start doing that better, that's going to start really improving user experiences. I mean, how many times have any of you guys like called your mobile, like T-Mobile or Sprint, your mobile service provider or your internet provider, and called to complain about something or asked to solve a problem, and it's just like oftentimes it's like torture. People don't like talking to customer support because there's always some degree of negativity from the get-go if you need help with something. But if they had like either some support widget or some way of using AI to solve your problem very quickly, that is where AI is really going to start shining very soon in the future.
Are there any companies or products where you feel like the user experience is truly excellent in terms of how they incorporated AI?
Yeah, I think that right now AI is still, in its infancy, is for how a lot of products are using it. I think some of the best products that are using AI right now are more like AI for the sake of AI type products. You've got like Leonardo AI, which is, really got useful with a lot of image creation things. In fact, actually, Photoshop has, I think, done really, really well I don't know if I agree with some of the ways they've rolled out some of their AI type things, but I've had old vintage photos that I've tried to repair, and it's just like an insane amount of work, retouching and fixing that type of stuff up. But AI, I've had things that have taken me hours, and I can just have the AI go and repair certain parts of the photo and just select something, and that is I think the way Photoshop implemented the AI image repair and creation into their platform was very expected and very intuitive. I think they did actually a really great job of that. Now their models and the actual results may not be the best at times, but sometimes it can be like exactly what you need. And I think that definitely Photoshop is one. I'd have to think of some others, but yeah.
What do you think allows Photoshop to do it so effectively, whereas other companies just kind of slapped it on and people don't really have the same kind of positive reaction that you just exhibited toward Photoshop, which by the way, I totally get. Like it made
Mhm.
perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is Photoshop has a lot of like Adobe has a lot of resources, and they've been working on this for a very long time. And I think that OpenAI really kicked off the race. Like it got all these companies that were working on it to realize, okay, this stuff we've been working on for years, we just got to get it out, and to start like showing that we're relevant, that we're still relevant. And that's where I think Adobe Photoshop, they just started launching some of the stuff a year ago, and it wasn't great like Firefly when it first launched, and even frankly like some of the image generation from Midjourney in its early stages, it didn't look very good. I remember a couple of years ago I was trying out some things with Dolly when it was like really in its research stages, and a lot of aspects of it were just like really looked bad. And that's where I think Photoshop, they just had those resources to do that, but they had a lot of um, user data and research from like people using Photoshop all the time. And I think that the way they got to where they are with their current AI features in Photoshop was their content aware replacement and their healing brush type of stuff. Where if I were to guess, I would say they noticed a lot of people were just trying to like delete certain things in images, and they felt like, oh well, AI can actually be much more efficient and the results can be much higher quality when you're just trying to like delete small things from images. And then they probably looked at like, oh well, you could actually just add things in there too. And even if you look at it, if you test it out, you'll notice deleting things tends to have much better results than adding things in Photoshop, just because their image generation part of it is still, it's still got a ways to go, but they've been improving very quickly. And it's pretty impressive, the stuff that Photoshop can do, especially they have that generative expand where you have a small image and then you can just crop it out and it'll generate the content around it. It does really well with that typically.
Have you checked out Photoshop battles in the subreddits?
No, I haven't for a while. I think I looked at those a couple years ago, but I haven't recently.
I feel like Photoshop uh, AI tools have completely killed that. It's not as fun anymore.
I know that's definitely true, but now you've got like with all the AI image generation stuff. In fact, that's one thing that I think Leonardo AI, if any of you haven't tried that, it's got like a sketch type feature where you can kind of draw things out. Now it doesn't work super well, but it lets you kind of try to draw out some ideas from your mind, and then it'll generate an image based on your prompt and what you've drawn out. And it can start helping you, like especially people who are artistically they're not very artistically inclined. It can really help you like visualize what you have in your mind very quickly, and then once you've got a solid base, then you can kind of keep iterating, or you can move it to other AI platforms like Midjourney, or even like Microsoft is using Dolly 3. It's really started closing up the gap like on the quality, where Midjourney was seen as like no one can even compete with it, but some of these other image models from like Microsoft and OpenAI have really been closing in that gap.
So I noticed that pretty much all the tools that we talked about are all text-based or voice-based in some way, shape, or form. Like you need to be able to communicate in words, either text typed or over voice, to get the kind of results that you want or some kind of action. Where do you see that going in the future? Do you feel like we're just gonna slowly evolve through that, or are we going to shift the paradigm at some point?
Yeah, I think that kind of comes back to the, a lot of companies are starting out with like this chat interface, and they see it as like the chat is the end all be all. And I think it's going to really depend on the situation. That's why I think multimodal is going to be really important. And it's not really about like am I talking to her, or am I chatting with it? It's about the human interaction side of it. Like, what do I need? What's the shortest distance between 2 points? And sometimes that is going to be, chatting. Maybe I'm in a room and I don't want it to be loud or anything. I can't talk out loud. Or maybe it's just faster. Typing does take a lot of time and effort. So maybe I want to just ask it. But then there's also, reliability issues with voice transcription sometimes. And then you have to like go back and delete it, or it's not hearing you right. And so then in other situations, there's multimodal where I could like pull up an interface and tap on a button, and then everything's happening in the back end, but it still requires a lot of AI. Similar to the astronaut analytics dashboard that we're kind of looking at, where a lot of those things, you don't need to ask the AI. You can just click a button and look at your sentiment analysis for your community platform. And then you didn't have to spend a lot of time, telling it like, I need you to do all these things, because that could get really cumbersome. And so it's really, I know this is kind of a cop out, but it depends on your situation. But I don't think that there's going to be one that's going to rule them all. I think really those three, multimodal, chat, and then voice dictation, are probably the three main ways that people are going to be interacting with AI.
Do you feel like we could ever get to a point where you no longer have to communicate your needs and wants, and in some ways they kind of know what you need to do and kind of predict it for you?
Yes, and that's one of the things I've really been interested in AI. And I think to get there, you have to really move more into the personal assistance space with AI, where right now AI doesn't, there's context windows, which is essentially like if I'm on ChatGPT, I ask it a question and, it sends the question, the response, but everything within that window, that's why it's called a context window, because it tries to remember everything you've talked to within that context, but they have limitations. And I haven't really seen this term used, but I call it global memory. And I think the only way to do that is that if you essentially had the AI, on your own local device or something like that, and you started actually controlling its training data. Now that means that it would be a little bit more difficult for companies to like update the AI's knowledge base. But I'm sure there's ways around that. I doubt that's too much of a problem. But then if you can start actually changing its training data, then everything you ask it, you don't have to say, remember this or that. It's as though you have your own personal assistant. It's just going to remember everything that you ask it to do. And then it'll remember your passwords. I mean, how many times, I can't tell you how many times like I've used my Google Assistant and remember when they said like, hey, tell it to remember your byte combination or something like that. And then I'll say, I'll go back, a year or months later. I'm like, hey, what was my byte combination? And it just doesn't even have it. Like, I'm like, okay, so I told you to remember that, and you definitely didn't save that information. And so I think that's where AI is going to be like hyper useful for people in doing those things. If it has a global memory and just remembers everything you've ever told it, then you don't have to, worry too much about giving context, because it starts to become your actual personal assistant and knows the things you like, and it will speak to those things just as if you actually had your own personal assistant.
I'm ashamed to not know this, but is the physical device, the rabbit, holding information locally, or does it still need the internet connection to like query the AI?
From what I've seen, it still is just using the internet to pull all information. I think that's why it's using like a mobile data connection. And from my knowledge, I don't know of. So you can download AIs to your own computer, and there's different ways of doing it. There's, for example, image generation. There's this thing called Comfy UI, and you can bring in a bunch of different AI models and start like connecting different nodes together. And there's all kinds of stuff you can do that within the realm of usually image generation. I think it does have some text generation things too, actually. But with most things like localized like having the model be localized on your computer and affecting its own training data, it's a lot of work, and it takes up a lot of data. And so that's definitely not happened even remotely on a consumer scale. But I think once they find a way to make that efficient for users, that's where I think that those capabilities are going to be a little bit more noticeable and possible.
I feel like we're getting there pretty quickly in terms of, I mean, it's just a storage and processor challenge, right? And we're
Yeah,
definitely
that's
increasing that
mostly,
year by
from my
year.
knowledge, what it is. It's being able to store that information. And technically, it doesn't. I don't think it actually has to be done on the user's computer. Like it could still be hosted in the cloud. But I think once every user starts having their own AI and they're actually like changing this training data, there's going to be so many duplicates of AIs in the world that the amount of storage is, I think it's going to go crazy on users' needs. If like something like global memory started becoming more prevalent, then there'd be insane storage needs for that.
Can't wait for that.
Yeah, I mean,
We're,
I'm really excited for that, because then you're going to be able to automate like and do so many more things.
so we're almost at time now. Do you have any advice for other designers who want to do what you're doing? Do you have any favorite resources, any tips, any tricks to get them up to speed so that they can start creating demos like the ones that you're making?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the first thing is uh, know what you want to do. Come up with ideas for what you want to do, because it's really easy to like just try to learn technology for the sake of learning it. But if you don't find some value in like what you want to get out of it, then you're going to quickly find yourself wasting your time. But then for AI specifically, I would try to get to know what's going on out there, like what different types of models there are with AI, and then what they're good at, and see what companies like do a lot of kind of in the design world, it's really heavily called like competitive analysis, and just looking around and seeing what works and what doesn't, and what you like, and then find some prototyping software. You could just do it in Figma, where you don't have data, you're just kind of experimenting with ideas. But if you want to actually make things work, if you want to code it, then learn some code, like learn JavaScript and learn APIs. Or I think React is a big JavaScript platform that I would suggest. Or if you want to get more into prototyping, Protopie is a great option. Origami is also really great. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's got some really great things about it. Or you could actually just use some like web builder, like Webflow or WordPress. You could really do anything. Things that are more on the actual building it yourself side, like Webflow or coding it, are going to be a lot more complicated. But there's always things you can test out. I would start out just learning some prototyping software, like Figma. I mean, like Origami or Protopie, where they do have API access, and then just reading up documentation, watching tutorials on how to do that, and then thinking about ways that you can experiment with multimodal, or really just getting it to work. And I think that you're going to start finding opportunities opening up.
I love that. Are there any specific websites or books or resources that you would recommend to other people?
Yeah, I've actually got a list that I can post in the comments after of different things. And there's one website for like AI principles that I've seen recently, and it's got a lot of really good principles of like how to explain AI to users and things like that. So I'll post a link to that as well.
Very cool. Thank you so much. Any final words before we hop off?
No, I'm just. I mean, I guess I'm really excited to see where AI goes, and if there's one area that is really gaining a lot of market share, understanding AI, how it works, and how it can benefit businesses, that is going to become hugely valuable, especially if you're a designer and you're wanting to get into that. I'd really recommend like really having a pretty strong skill set around AI to compete, especially in the market right now.
Sorry, one last question. Do you see any companies that you feel like they're missing this massive golden opportunity and they should definitely do something with it now that AI has become more prevalent that you wish they would incorporate into their products or features?
Yeah, I think that the biggest ones are now. I think they are actually adding AI, but companies that have a lot of automation opportunities, like IFT or even companies like Notion. A lot of companies are just using AI right now to essentially translate text to something else or write text. A lot of it's just usually just text based, and I think once those companies start adding more actions, that is where I think you're going to notice a lot more of an advantage, and having it localized to different users. Like Zapier is a good one where they are adding a lot of chatbots, and they are adding some degree of like, you can ask the AI like, hey, create an automation for this, and it's going to start adding some of those blocks in to do an automation like that. But where I think there's a big gap is it's really a technology gap right now. So I don't know of many companies that are not like necessarily trying to fill that gap off the top of my head, but I think that there's a big opportunities for those companies, like the first companies that do fill that gap between just using this natural language processing to actually getting it to do things for users and actually putting actions on those users' accounts. I think that is where there's a big gap. Say like Netflix, and if you want to cancel your account, and I know this is like to Netflix's disadvantage, but if you had like a little AI widget or something on Netflix and you just clicked on it and you said, hey, cancel my account or something like that, and if it did it, that is where I think a lot of companies are missing that gap, is just like allowing the AI to access their own platforms for their own users' accounts or things like that.
I see. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today, Joshua. I've learned a lot. I hope the audience has learned a lot as well. Thank you to everyone who stayed through the entire hour. Really appreciate it. And we'll hope to see you next week. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Take care, everyone.